Mary Antoinette Barnes was born on April 28, 1834, in Rodman, Jefferson County, New York. She was the only daughter of Lorenzo Dow and Urilla Barnes. At the age of 11, her family relocated to Greenleaf, Wisconsin, a newly developed area with limited educational resources at the time. Mary received much of her early education at home under the guidance of a governess, though she also attended public school in Greenleaf. She was a member of the Baptist faith. At 16, Mary Antoinette Barnes began her career as a teacher. In 1852, she married Alfred Hitchcock, with whom she had one son and one daughter. After marriage, she continued teaching, and in 1857, her husband was ordained as a minister and became an advocate for temperance reform. In 1859, they moved to Kansas, where they lived during the Civil War. Mary was a passionate supporter of the Union and the anti-slavery movement, eager to help however she could. During this time, many leaders passed through her town en route to Osawatomie, Kansas, to form the Republican Party. One night, she housed and fed 50 of these leaders, including Horace Greeley, and spent hours preparing food for their journey the next day. As the first assistant and county superintendent of schools in Phillip County, Kansas, she and her husband organized the county into school districts and established several schools. Later, after moving to Fremont, Nebraska, where her husband accepted a pastorate, Mary became an active member in the Women's Christian Temperance Union. Recognizing the need for a state organization to ensure lasting impact, she led the effort in 1874 that eventually established the Nebraska WCTU. After relocating to California, her husband passed away in 1878. She returned to Nebraska, where she held various roles within the WCTU, eventually becoming state president in 1888, a position she held for 6 years. In this role, she traveled across the state, organizing unions, attending conventions, and delivering speeches. She also supported the major prohibition campaign in Kansas. Mary was deeply moved by the tragic death of her cousin, George G. Haddock, who was murdered by a drunken man in Sioux City, Iowa. Standing by his body, she promised his grieving widow that she would dedicate her life to fighting alcohol abuse, a commitment she honored wholeheartedly. In 1894, she married Wilson Wakeland. At the time of her death, Mary held the position of State Superintendent of Mothers' Meetings within the WCTU. On February 25, 1900, Mary A. Hitchcock Wakeland was tragically murdered by her husband, Wilson Wakeland, while she was asleep at their home in Fremont, Nebraska. Shortly afterward, Wilson took his own life at a cemetery about a mile away where his first wife was buried. Mary had been ill and in a weakened state for some time. For years, it had been widely known that Wilson and Mary had a troubled relationship, often quarreling over the division of property, as Wilson was quite wealthy. John Henry Hayes was born in Ohio, but moved to Iowa when he was 15. For the next 3 years, he worked on his family's farm. In 1862, he volunteered for the Union Army, enduring multiple injuries during the war, including a gunshot wound to his left thumb and injuries from debris when a bridge collapsed. On April 16, 1865, just a week after Confederate General Robert E. Lee's surrender at Appomattox Courthouse, Hayes marched on Columbus, Georgia, to secure the city's naval yards, weapons factories, and supply depots. In the ensuing battle, Hayes led a charge across the bridge over the Chattahoochee River and helped capture a fort defending it. During the assault, he seized the flag and captured the flag bearer of an Austin battery stationed at the fort. For his bravery, Hayes was awarded the Medal of Honor. After the Civil War, Hayes returned to his family's farm, but left in 1868 to open a blacksmith shop in Greenfield, Iowa. In 1888, he relocated to Troy, Idaho, where he established another blacksmith shop, which was later destroyed in a fire. Following the fire, Hayes turned to silver prospecting and found some success as a miner. In 1894, he was appointed as the city's marshal of Troy. On January 27, 1904, Hayes attempted to arrest Payne Sly, a notorious local criminal, on a domestic disturbance charge. In the shootout that followed, Sly fatally wounded Hayes. Despite his injuries, Hayes managed to return fire, injuring Sly. Sly was later convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Ellis Alfred Swaringen and his twin brother Lemuel were the oldest of 8 children born to Dutch-American farmer Daniel J. Swaringen and Katie Montgomery in Oskaloosa, Iowa. Swaringen lived with his family well into adulthood and only arrived in Deadwood in May of 1876, accompanied by his wife, Nettie Swaringen. Nettie later divorced him, citing spousal abuse. Swaringen went on to marry 2 more times, though both marriages also ended in divorce. Before opening a business in Deadwood, Swaringen ran a dance hall in Custer, South Dakota. According to the 1882 New Year edition of the Black Hills Pioneer, which chronicled Custer's early history, Al Swaringen was running a dance house measuring 30 by 150 feet, and day and night people had to push and crowd to get inside. The publication also explained Swaringen's departure, noting that in January of 1876, news spread to Custer about gold being discovered in Deadwood Gulch. By March, a mass exodus from Custer to Deadwood began. The roads were filled with people, leaving fewer than 100 residents in Custer. Land that had been selling for $800 just 2 months earlier was now worth less than $50. Swaringen initially owned and operated a canvas and lumber saloon in Deadwood called the Cricket, which offered gambling and hosted prize fights. However, he soon shut it down and opened a larger establishment, the Gem Theater. The Gem served as a saloon, dance hall, and brothel. Swaringen enticed vulnerable young women to Deadwood and forced them into prostitution through a mix of intimidation and physical violence, often carried out by him and his enforcers. Calamity Jane, one of the Gem's first dancers, once helped Swaringen by bringing him 10 girls from Sidney, Nebraska. The business was extremely profitable, with the Gem earning an average of $5,000 a night, sometimes reaching as high as $10,000. On September 26, 1879, the Gem burned down in a fire that consumed much of Deadwood, but Swaringen quickly rebuilt, creating an even larger and more luxurious version of his saloon to widespread acclaim. Swaringen's knack for forming strategic alliances and making financial contributions helped protect him from the town's efforts to clean up Deadwood, including the work of Seth Bullock, the town's first sheriff. In 1899, the Gem burned down again, this time for good. That same year, Swaringen left Deadwood and married Odelia Turgeon. It is commonly believed that Swaringen died penniless while attempting to board a freight train, but further research indicates that he was likely murdered. According to his recently rediscovered obituary and contemporary newspaper reports, Swaringen's body was found on November 15, 1904, in the middle of a street in suburban Denver with a severe head wound. Less than 2 months earlier, his twin brother Lemuel had been shot by unknown assailants, but survived, despite not being robbed, raising further suspicions about the circumstances surrounding both incidents. Frank Stenberg was born in Keokuk, Iowa, and grew up in Knoxville as the 4th of 10 children of Bernardus and Cornelius Stenberg. He had 5 brothers and 4 sisters. After attending Iowa State College in Ames, he worked as a printer's apprentice before becoming a publisher. In 1881, he was hired by the Des Moines Register in Des Moines. He later moved to Knoxville and published a local newspaper until 1886, when he relocated to Caldwell, Idaho Territory, where he partnered with his younger brother Albert K. Stenberg to take over the Caldwell Tribune for 6 years. Stenberg became politically active when he participated in the 1889 Idaho Constitutional Convention, which led to Idaho's statehood in 1890. That same year, he was elected to the Idaho House of Representatives as a fusion candidate, receiving endorsements from both the Democratic and Populist parties, and served a single term. Additionally, he served for several years as the chairman of the Caldwell Town Council. In 1896, with the backing of labor unions, Stenberg was nominated as the joint candidate for governor by both the Democratic and Populist parties. At the age of 35, he won the November election, becoming the youngest governor in Idaho's history and the first non-Republican to hold the office. He was re-elected to a second 2-year term in 1898. Stenberg served during a time of significant labor unrest, particularly in the northern Idaho mining industry. Many corporations worried that his government would not side with them in the event of a strike, making them raise wages for their workers. However, The Bunker Hill Mining Company, which employed non-union labor, kept wages lower than those at unionized mines in the region. In April of 1899, members of the Western Federation of Miners destroyed the company's mill at Wardner in Silver Valley. In response, Stenberg declared martial law. With the National Guard deployed to the Philippines after the Spanish-American War, he requested President William McKinley send federal troops to restore order. This decision angered Stenberg's Union supporters, who saw it as a betrayal. Martial law continued until the end of his term, and Stenberg chose not to seek a third term in 1900. Nearly 5 years after leaving office, Stenberg was killed by a bomb outside his home in Caldwell at 1602 Dearborn Street. The bomb was planted on the side gate along 16th Avenue. Harry Orchard, a former miner with the Western Federation of Miners, was quickly arrested for the assassination. The investigation was led by Pinkerton agent James McParland. Orchard initially denied involvement, but after being placed in solitary confinement and subjected to intense questioning by McParland, he signed a detailed 64-page confession. In it, Orchard claimed that he had been a paid assassin and dynamiter for the WFM, responsible for at least 17 other deaths. He stated that he was hired to kill Stenberg by WFM leaders, including Big Bill Haywood, the WFM's general secretary, Charles Moyer, its president, and George Pettibone, a labor activist with a past conviction tied to an 1892 labor dispute. At McParland's urging, Haywood, Moyer, and Pettibone were arrested in Denver in February of 1908 and extradited to Iowa for trial. The highly publicized trial took place in Boise during the summer of 1907, with U.S. Senator William Borah prosecuting and Clarence Darrow defending the accused. Orchard reaffirmed his confession on the witness stand, detailing his years of involvement with the WFM's violent activities. He was cross-examined by the defense for 26 hours over the course of a week. The prosecution presented 80 witnesses to support Orchard's account, while the defense called over 100 witnesses. Despite expectations of a guilty verdict, the jury acquitted Haywood in late July. Pettibone, tried separately in Denver, was also acquitted and charges against Moyer were dropped. Orchard, however, pleaded guilty in a separate trial and was sentenced to death, though his sentence was later commuted to life in prison. In 1952, at the age of 86, Orchard wrote in his autobiography that his confession and testimony had been truthful. He died in prison in 1954.